the outcome of that is we're going to question really how we think of, the vulnerabilities, to our society that exist in a cyber sense or in a digital sense versus in a physical sense. Because, in a lot of ways, I think we tend to have this view, and when I say we here, I'm thinking loosely the intelligence community. We have this view that if I find a problem, I take note of it. I don't do anything, though, because it gives me an opportunity to continue to observe. And this is what I think is probably the most egregious. It is as if you notice in your picket, and when I say a picket, in your security, you notice that somebody has gone missing and there's a gap in your security. And you want to watch to see who comes in rather than saying, oh my God, there's a gap in our security. We better cover that up. This is so, thoughts on,
and it's,
I'm sure you've run into this idea.
Oh my, I've probably been part of that problem in some ways because again, there's a couple of things on this one and it's actually a really, really good point. Perfect way of putting it. NSA came out couple of months ago and said, hey, we found vulnerabilities in this and we're going to tell everybody about it. The cynics among us were like, well, you guys have probably known about this for the last 10 years. And unfortunately, now somebody else has cottoned on, so you're just going to get ahead of the news and be nice people. Because let's face it, that probably is reality, because we find so many bugs and issues in systems. And quite honestly, there is an ethical conversation to happen, which is, let's say I find a vulnerability in, and we'll talk about these in a minute. I found a vulnerability in a phone. I can go to Apple and say, hey, I've got a vulnerability. Apple writes me a checkout, or I go to BugCrowd or HackOne. They write me a checkout, and I go off on my merry way. I can also take that vulnerability, go to the US intelligence community and say, hey, I've given you another opportunity to keep an eye on things because potentially it could save lives. There is that discussion. Now, the problem is if I do that, the community at large, are 330 million people running around with these blasted phones, don't get the benefit of getting better coverage. Flip side is, I hopefully protect a bunch of folks that are going in situation or into theater that otherwise would have compromised the communication for. It's a nasty balance. And I think the micro thing was probably one. I mean, another example on this one, FBI, perfect example. FBI basically turned and said, we need access, we need to be able to crack mobile phones. A lot of us in the industry were like, well, go ask the guys down the road from you out in the, on the East Coast. But they can't do that, or even if they can, those agencies aren't going to tip their hand because darn well as soon as you tell the FBI that this is on there, it's going to end up in court, at which point we lose our advantage. And so they end up having to go over to obviously Israel and get it done that way. And it's frustrating as all heck because it's like, what do I want? Do I want to protect the masses by telling them and helping protect them? Or do I want to protect the masses by still being able to pull in intelligence and information because people don't realize how far into their systems we actually are?
Yeah. So, I think that, this is really getting to the crux of the problem. And that is data security, and data being the oil of the 21st century, the thing that drives artificial intelligence and big data and machine learning and all of that. Is that the thing that we should be protecting? Or should we protect our prerogative when it comes to having access to other data? So, this is a classic military problem. Do I focus on the offense or do I focus on the defense? I've come to the conclusion that if we don't focus on the defense in the United States, and by the way, I think the Chinese and the Russians have figured this out, which is why the Russians, basically figured out that, hey, we need to be able to disconnect from the global internet, and the Chinese built a great firewall. Exactly. We haven't figured this out. And I think the authoritarians having to control their society were the first ones to recognize that if we don't control this, if we don't, as Clinton said, nail Jello to the wall, which he said they couldn't do and they clearly have done, then we're going to be in big trouble in terms of controlling our population. So it's really about understanding where the 21st century is going in terms of what is the biggest threat to your society. I think that's where we've completely lost the bubble, and preserving our ability to look into other systems is not as important as protecting the ability for, or preventing the ability of other outside state actors of looking into our system. I think that's the key idea here. If you go back to, for example, and I'm gonna go into a little bit of Cold War deterrence theory here.
Yeah.
An Air Force mathematician, a guy named Lieutenant General Glenn Clanton, a good book, good monograph that he wrote called Thinking About Defense. And what he found was that in 1963, it would cost $28 billion to protect 70% of America from a nuclear attack, to create a defensive umbrella. But to protect 90% of the population would cost 6 times that. The other thing that he found was that for every dollar that the Soviet Union added to their ICBM force, we would have to spend $6 in defense. And so it was economically infeasible. And so I think that's where mutually assured destruction came from. This is where this idea came from. We're going to focus on growing our economy, our science and technology, and we're just going to tell the Soviet Union, if you do anything, it's all out war. And so it was this deterrence theory that kind of was our main theory of victory in the Cold War. But I think today in the 21st century, where having your data is such an important advantage for artificial intelligence and growing both the economy and your ability to control populations, that the reverse is true. We're spending $800 billion a year on defense, and we ought to be spending it on protecting the data of our citizens. And I think that's where, you're on the front lines of that. Do you agree with that? Because, that's a conclusion I've come to.
It's hard to disagree with it, because you hit two of the major ones. Obviously, China's got the Great Firewall, and they have a huge force leveled against us. Absolutely. In the digital world, they have a massive force leveled against us. I don't know what the exact ratios are, but we're outnumbered quite considerably. You look at to your point, what Russia has done with the ability to disconnect, but then you come back to some of our friends. You look at what a couple of the countries in the Nordic world have done. They have put protections around their basically borders, and they put protections around their citizens. You look at what Israel has done. Israel knows every single year it's going to get hit by Op Israel, and also all the countries around it are doing everything on the physical and the digital world to do everything they can. They have an entire section of that team looking at protecting their internal cities and their borders. We don't have that. It's basically we're all for ourselves at this point in time. It's the mentality is basically it's like, hey, you got your Second Amendment, you got your gun, good luck. By the way, the Second Amendment is now you got your computer, good luck, hope you can do okay. That's it. That's and that's not going to work.